which relates to both healthcare specifically, also a more general understanding of care for the self and collective that involves ongoing repair of infrastructures, relationships, and beings. Sorry. That's all right. I'm watching a little, exactly. Dr. Jenna Grant has also developed research questions, methods, and commitments in 3 different directions: medical imaging and visual practices of healthcare in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, thinking about Cambodia as a site of experimental global health sciences and experiments in collective care in Cambodia and the US. And Dr. Grant also has a book, if you would like to check it out, called Fixing the Image, Ultrasound and the Visuality of Care in Phnom Penh, which was published in 2022 with UW Press. So please join me in welcoming our speakers, and please take it away.
All right, I think I'm supposed to stand, is that right? Well, thank you so much, Rowan, for that introduction. And yeah, thank you to Sarah and yeah, CSDE in general for having me and hosting this event. This is such a cool room. I've never been here before, and I feel like we're about to go into outer space, which is sort of appropriate because the last chapter of my book is about outer space. So. And can you hear me okay? Okay. I also really want to thank Nassim and Jenna for being here. I can't imagine 2 more inspiring scholars to be in conversation with. I feel like each of your areas of expertise will it speaks to different, maybe some of what I'm trying to get out of the book. So I really am excited for the conversation and to hear your feedback and any criticism too. So yeah, and thank you all for being here. I know it's like a rainy Friday. I thought there would be 5 people here, and there are like maybe more than that. So and to everybody online. I also did a book talk like recently, and I was like, oh, nobody's coming to this, so thank you. Because yeah. Anyway, I also wanted to say, I know this is the Center for the Studies of Demography and Ecology, and there's not a lot of that directly in my book, but there are some kind of interesting conversations we can have about. Nassim just reminded me there's a conversation about IBM and census counting in the 1940s in Romania, so we can kind of talk about that. And ecology does surface in particular, I guess, through a critique of IKEA, which we can also talk about. But I thought what I'd do here is just kind of give you a little context for how or why I wrote the book and kind of, yeah, how it came to be what it is. And then I'll read a few pages from it. Some of which might repeat with some of the pages I read the other night for the couple of you who were here at both events, so I'm sorry. Okay, so I guess for some context, back in around 2008, 2009, there was the foreclosure crisis, the recession crisis. And it was in that context that I was engaged in a lot of housing organizing in San Francisco primarily. This was also this moment often called the tech boom 2.0 or the second .com boom. But there was a wealth of tech capital flowing into San Francisco and the broader Bay Area. And a lot of real estate speculators were eager to capitalize upon that. And so there was this eviction crisis where a lot of poor and working class tenants were being displaced, often being replaced by whiter and wealthier tenants. I was part of a direct action mutual aid group called Eviction Free San Francisco, and we did a lot of kind of theatrical actions, blocking Google buses, which were taking white collar tech workers to their campuses, kind of calling attention to the gentrifying effects of this incursion of Silicon Valley into San Francisco. But at the same time, and I was also going back and forth between the US and Romania, I'd started hanging out there and getting involved in housing organizing there also around 2010 or so. During this moment in which Cluj, Napoca, which is the capital of Transylvania, which is a province in Romania, became dubbed as the Silicon Valley of Eastern Europe. So I suddenly watched this transformation take place there that I think on the surface might have seemed very similar to what was happening in San Francisco. Racialized dispossession was at play. A lot of Romanian Roma communities were being pushed out of their homes as the city gentrified and embraced sort of like smart city fantasy. And I was part of 2 housing justice organizations, collectives that were organizing against these evictions. One was called the Fece de Lei in Bucharest, or the Common Front for Housing Rights. And the other is Postsocialist, or social housing now. which was kind of fighting for social housing and against evictions in Cluj. So this project sort of emerged in which I was living in and organizing in two cities in really different parts of the world that were both experiencing kind of tech-induced displacement, but also that were both being kind of branded the same thing. This like Silicon Valley, San Francisco was siliconizing, Cluj was siliconizing. And I was interested in the through lines of that. I was interested in what Silicon Valley does as an imperial formation, but what was also really apparent was that the two places couldn't be, more different in a lot of ways, and that by just calling both of these areas silicon, a lot of sort of what I was calling epistemological gentrification was taking place, like erasing other histories of housing, of land tenure, of dispossession, and also of technology. And so Romania actually excelled at hardware production during the Cold War. It was producing more kind of third generation, fourth generation computers than other countries in the region. And then there was a lot of like deviant technological practices happening underground. So, or above ground, not like actually in the basement, but not as a part of the state. And the state was very much invested in this surveillance project, but a lot of people who couldn't afford Western computers were cloning Western models and making their own computers. And even after state socialism ended, a lot of people continued these practices, creating their own internet networks and also making their own computers and kind of their own technocultures. And it was after 1989, after state socialism ended and the Cold War ended, and a lot of Western tech was really outside of Romania during the Cold War, that Western tech came rushing in to kind of absorb it. And a lot of people started working instead for like Romanian companies, for US outsourcing firms. So my book is really interested in this sort of transformation of the Cold War, which was also, funneling a lot of government money to the computer industry and the hardware and then software industry in the Bay Area, and then became increasingly consumeristic after the Cold War. So there's this sort of question of like, how can we understand Silicon Valley through a critique of the Cold War and its aftermaths? And then I guess there's also, there's something that I'm looking at in the book too, in terms of how these anti-communist fantasies manifest in both locales. So a lot of the process of siliconization in Romania is this anti-communist project that likes to see the socialist era as this sort of darkened, deadened, stained in the progress of modernization. And by kind of bypassing that and looking back to the pre-socialist era when Bucharest was actually called the Little Paris of the East. There were a lot of these little Parises at the time in the 1930s. And Timișoara, which is in the west of the state, that was the Little Vienna of the East. So it's sort of interesting that now we have these little Silicon Valleys. And so part of my my attempt to think about Silicon Valley as an imperial formation is to think about how during that moment, Western Europe played a really key role in terms of where empire was located and centralized. And now in a sort of post-Cold War time, we're seeing Silicon Valley emerge as another sort of, we can think of it as a metropole of sorts, but also it remains a fiction because none of these places are Silicon Valley, and that's part of the project. Anyway, so that's a little bit of me rambling. I would say also part of the project is the book was actually initially going to be called Unbecoming Silicon Valley, and my editor didn't like that. So, so there is this critique of Silicon Valley as something that does material dispossession and epistemological dispossession, but I'm really committed to thinking about ways that different groups refuse siliconization or refuse becoming Silicon Valley. And so the latter half of the book is much more an engagement with artists, technologists, activists that are thinking about technologies otherwise, that are thinking about ways to envision techno futures outside of Silicon Valley logics, and also ways that people are organizing on the ground to kind of refuse siliconization as a gentrifying force. Yes, okay. I thought I would like read a couple pages and then hand it over for conversation because it's not fun to just hear me read too much, but maybe I'll just read the first like page or two and then I can describe what the chapter is to and then I'll hand it over. Okay. So the book begins like this. Is this what it's really like in Silicon Valley? My friend asks me, imagining that the recent rebranding of the Romanian city of Cluj as the Silicon Valley of Eastern Europe implies a sort of mimicry. Somehow we've managed to find our way inside of what has become an emblem of Cluj's transformation, the tall jutting tower of NTT Data, which flashes a colossal sign godlike onto the city's tech horizon. Now that we're inside, feelings of curiosity and clandestineness have overcome us as we study the interior of the building's fake wall plants, human-shaped robots, and large, soft mushroom statues, all appealing to the astrofuturist science fiction aesthetic of outer space travel and speculative futures, though perhaps more of an Elon Musk imaginary than that of the cosmonautical communist futurism popular during state socialism in Romania, which lasted from 1947 to 1989. NTT Data, a Japanese-based information or IT firm, set up shop in the aftermath of Romania's transition into what are now considered ongoing post-socialist times. While numerous global and primarily Western tech corporations rushed in to capitalize on the labor and infrastructural spoils of the 1989 transition, it was later in 2013 that NTT acquired the Cluj-based EBS software company. Soon after, NTT remodeled the building and employed new aesthetic grammars of siliconization, where the technopolitics and processes caught up in fantasies of becoming Silicon Valley. In the case of NTT, this meant distributing software services replete with real-time solutions and global delivery capabilities to 40 countries, and having a Romanian staff fluent in English. Soon enough, this website bistro was opened up on the building's 4th floor, accessible to guests who have since been able to order food and drinks from electronic tablets on the balcony while surrounded by cranes and the echoing sound of so-called smart city development. And this is where we are sitting, hovering above the threshold of Eastern Europe's supposed new Silicon Valley. And I'm going to skip and read it. Okay, so yes, okay, yes. Rather than down. Yes, maybe I'll go with this and you can look at the cover, which is designed by my friend, Alex Fergie-Dunn. Okay. Yes, it's this, I think the cover is better than the book, I tell you, but it's this like monster burning down a house. Okay, so with this in mind, I forged the analytic of Silicon Valley imperialism, or a global condition in which Silicon Valley's existence is necessitated by its unending growth, and in which it penetrates and devours people's intimate lives, local epistemologies, and personal data, while also consuming global and even outer space imaginaries in novel ways. While Silicon Valley is emboldened by and often co-constitutive of US empire, it is not synonymous with it, nor has it replaced US empire or co-opted the space of Western Europe, which I talked about earlier, in kind of pre-socialist or post-socialist fantasies. Rather, Silicon Valley imperialism coexists on a mutating playbook of schisms and captures of post-Enlightenment liberal and illiberal imaginaries of desires and horrors, all informing various states of becoming and unbecoming. And then I'm going to skip one more time. Okay. So geographically, this book's chapters transit the Romanian cities of Bucharest, Cluj, and Râmnicu Vâlcea, which is often dubbed as Hackerville by the West. If you look up Hackerville, it's about the city called Râmnicu Vâlcea in Romania. And the Moldovan city of Chișinău, while also engaging spaces now comprising California's so-called Silicon Valley region. Employing ethnographic and interdisciplinary reading practices, I analyzed 3 phenomena unique to Romania's relationship with Silicon Valley imperial circuits. 1, geographic entanglements of Silicon Valley and Romanian technological, racial, and urban life worlds. 2, pre-socialist, socialist, and Cold War techno histories as they inform, haunt, and inspire those of the post-socialist or post-Cold War spectral present. And 3, the spatio-temporal entwining of divergent techno-imaginaries and materialities in post-socialist times. As I show, imaginaries and materialities, when studied together, underpin how meanings, dreams, and desires inform and are informed by lived realities. And so while situating my inquiry into the space-time of Silicon Valley imperialism, I also chart visions and practices of unbecoming. And I'm trying to show that there's analytic agency sewn into aspirations of both becoming and unbecoming. The work of unbecoming reveals that while siliconization is real and ongoing, so are other techno-urban practices unrecognizable through Google Glass or its search engine results. Their endurance imparts frictions that slow down and sometimes undo Silicon Valley materialities and imaginaries. So throughout this book, I unearth practices of unbecoming by engaging the work of activists, organizers, artists, performers, technologists, and theorists who look to the past, present, and future and their refusals of siliconization. It is through their work that Silicon Valley imperialism becomes unhinged and unraveled, sometimes overtly, sometimes in back-end code. And tracing these practices, as well as their violent structures, that their work refutes, the book's chapters dip in and out of technopolitical moments and intimate spaces alike in order to theorize interconnected spatiotemporalities, always in flux. So that's the book. There are 6 chapters and an epilogue, and I'm not going to read those. Yeah, okay. Do you want to? Yeah, we'll just play music.
Hello. So my name is Jenna Grant, and I'm in the anthropology department. As Rowan said, I want to thank Rowan for the invitation and thank Erin for this stunning book and the CSDE for the opportunity to talk about it together. I'm going to start with a few of the things that I liked about the book. Just things I think are really impressive and that I appreciated. And then I want to reflect on one of the main theoretical interventions as I see it around the multiplicity of post-socialism and what Erin is doing by kind of dislodging it from a territorial location in places that have literally gone through socialism, but extending that to Silicon Valley. And I'll just add a bit of my own experience sort of working in Cambodia, where post-socialism is also an important discourse about kind of imagined past and futures. Louder? Okay. Just wave. Oh yeah, okay. I would be remiss if I didn't speak about the theoretical breadth and depth of this book. Erin is in conversation with feminist STS, Eastern European studies, histories of California and the West, and critical race studies, though dividing these into schools is a bit arbitrary on my part. It's a gift to move across fields in the analysis of technoscience and racial capitalism, and to offer concrete, artistic, and activist community building practices that corrupt Silicon promises, as Erin writes. Similarly, I'm deeply appreciative of the multiplicity of methods that you use. Ethnographic work as an anthropologist, it's one of the things we do, and it's I'm always looking for the stories, the jokes, the asides, the sort of the descriptions, and they're really beautiful in this book. And as Erin mentioned, the ethnographic portion as well as the archival portion happened in California and in Romania in different cities, primarily Cluj, but in different parts of Romania. There's also collaborative production of zines, digital media, such as the Dislocari Story Map project, and also active participation in activist research, I guess we would say. And what I think Erin and their colleagues call, I might bring a microphone in here. Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I'm yelling, but I was. Okay. Tell me if it's too loud. Where am I? Yes. And so across these different ethnographic sites, Erin traces a consistent theme, if you will, of racialized dispossession. So this is across fantasies of techno-futurism, also fantasies of liberalism, fascism, and socialism. Empirically, we learn about IBM and IKEA, theater and visual art, the octopus-like machinations of Stanford, the Gothic hackers, computer clones, and eugenic computing. Erin's insistence on holding the complexity of categories is a model for us all. Communist utopia, for example, how in the Romanian case, this is a deracinated utopia, which Erin explores in the final chapter of the book in particular, but also the categories of post-socialism, which I'll talk a bit about later. Another category that does interesting work in the book is that of the vampire, and how the vampire has stood in for the predations of capitalism, in Marx's writing and others, for example, but is also a figure of exotification and sort of romanticization and feminization. Another thing that is beautiful and kind of illuminative throughout the book are the sort of the ironies of language, particularly in tech talk. where there's idealization of particular kind of practices or ideals, and then actually these are things that are despised in real life. So that sort of twinning, I guess, and that can be seen in the digital nomad, this phrase of kind of a free wandering, enjoying the wild east sort of thing about digital nomads who are foreign but basing themselves in Romania. But it's particularly violent term in Romania, given the centuries-long practices of forcing Roma people to stay put through enslavement by boyars and the church, and labor regimes to encourage sedentism by the socialist government. Another one of these sort of complex terms here is the sharing economy, which is sort of for Airbnb or Uber, or these sort of evoking a communitarian ethos while actively dispossessing people of public goods, like affordable housing, in the case of Airbnb, and also public spaces. In San Francisco, for example, where there's a story that I remember well when it happened, actually seeing the video circulate online of San Francisco tech workers trying to justify the removal of Black and Latinx teenagers from a playfield in San Francisco, right? Saying, oh, we reserved it on the app. The app wasn't public yet. It was sort of an app they designed. So it's just these sort of often quite violent ways of sneaking in ideals about community or sharing or freedoms, as in the case of the nomad. That I think tracking that language is really important because it does what Trujillo has talked about in terms of silencing. We could track these at different moments of silencing about kind of what might be going on. Another beautiful part of the book are the what you could call indigenous critique, or the critiques of people about what's going on around them, that keep kind of working through and questioning the foundational categories about, for example, progress, what it is to live amongst corporate welfare, and what techno-imperialism might look like. I love the story in the earlier part of the book, an area without running water and electricity, nicknamed the NATO bloc by children after Romania joined NATO and the EU. So this joining the EU and NATO had been touted as progress, right? By anti-communists in particular, and the children, they're all their wiseness and talk about the material realities and show otherwise. Also, I'll try to skip a little bit in the interest of time. The reputation from computing people working in computing in Romania around hacking. So sort of the definition of hacking, right? And this is a quote: "The West hacked us after 1989. We just hacked back." Right? And it's funny and snappy, but it's also it's really saying like, no, this term is not appropriate, like in the way that it's being evaluated. Right? So I was inspired by that attention to language and the kind of theorizing that people are doing with that. So in one place, Erin writes, might Silicon Valley's imperialism's own proclamations of ingenuity then be a fiction of sorts, one corrupted by the ghosts of techno-futurity that come before? And this, I couldn't help but think about the ways that techno-futurity and this discourse about infrastructure and modernity had played out in where I've done a lot of work in Cambodia. And I'll just give a short example because, again, you see the working of language along with material practices to erase particular histories and define kind of how the future should be. And so some of the work that I did was in a large hospital called the Khmer Soviet Friendship Hospital, retained the name even after 1989. But at the time I was doing my research, General Electric Corporation was amassing a donation program there. And one of the speeches that I attended from a corporate director, she said, "I would like to rename this hospital the Khmer GE Friendship Hospital." This is the first time that this hospital has had a donation of new machines as opposed to used machines, right? So he's connecting sort of this erasure of, half of the Cold War, but also the fact that the Soviet Union had built and equipped the hospital. There were new technologies at the time, right? And so there's just that work that's kind of constantly being done. And I think that the way that the activists that you worked with are kind of calling that out and holding it out for critique is really important. And so I appreciate that. I think I'm about out of time, so I'll stop there. Okay, thank you so much.
So do you respond? Should I do here? Do you want to respond now? Okay, all right, sounds good.
All right. Well, similarly, what a joy to be invited to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for organizing and for this beautiful venue that you have created. It was really, I was aware of the project and had read some chapters, but it was a pleasure to read throughout and see really all the layers that you have brought together and the theorizing. So I will be doing talking about two observations that I had reading the book, and then end with a question, especially as it relates to my own experience of growing up in Iran. I saw a lot of what you wrote kind of resonate with my own experience. But let me begin by saying how sort of much I enjoyed your book for its being so layered, following so many threads across place, times, past and present and future, California, Romania and beyond, and also the intellectual domains and territories that you explore. At the same time, the book is intimate and personal, as it chronicles your unique encounters with people and places. We can picture you vividly in this coffee shop or that building and observe both what you see immediately and what peeks through to you beyond the visible. I was also struck by the close attention that you pay to both the symbolic and the substantive aspects of your encounters. And you do it elegantly yet deliberately. As you move in these spaces, you point us to the symbols both of Silicon Valley imperialism and socialism's past and present. On the first page that you just read for us, we enter with you to what you refer to as a judging tower of entity data, and within it we see with you what you describe as fake wall plants, human-shaped robots, and large soft mushroom statues, all appealing to the Afrofuturist science fiction aesthetics of outer space, travel and speculative futures, but the Muskian versions, right? Later in chapter 6, we enter a shopping center in Odea with flower-like cosmological figures engraved into the columns of its concrete facade, but one that is home to Western businesses, including McDonald's, which obscure its agro-astro-socialist imagery. So Silicon Valley imperialism shows up materially and symbolically in what you refer to as, quote, the new aesthetic grammars of siliconization, but at the same time, you show us how socialist imaginaries, quote, endure, peeking out beyond the cheapness of McDonaldization. And it is delightful to see variations of those socialist imaginaries. One that especially captured my imagination was the one of the acorns, the legend of Gagarin taking acorns into space and planting them upon return to symbolize the aspiration for a peaceful communist utopia. And in this way, you deliver on the promise that you make early in the book that, quote, imaginaries and materialities, when studied together, underpin how meanings, dreams, and desires inform and are informed by our lived realities. I particularly enjoyed that. Finally, I was really struck by how well you tie in all these threads together and at the same time point us to the possibilities of unbecoming. Even though Unbecoming is a short chapter at the end, we see resonances of it throughout, both in the kinds of collectives and the ideals that we may aspire to. For example, you discover a summer camp you attended a couple years in a row where, quote, housing justice activists, anti-capitalists, queer theorists, anti-racist organizer, performance artists, and more have been annually gathering to think through futures, past and present, unrecognizable to Western coloniality. Slowly, they are doing the work of developing a new consciousness to decolonize the future. Again, that's not necessarily like in the final short chapter, but we see sort of resonances of these kinds of unbecoming shine throughout the chapters, and I particularly enjoyed it. Having read the book now a couple of times, I had thought that I could give my students an exercise where they just read the final paragraphs of each of the chapters or mini sections that you write, because of the way you pull everything together for us and show new possibilities. One of my many favorites appears at the end of chapter 6, where you share with us an ideal of a space that is, quote, not waiting in the distant horizon of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to permit access. Rather, space is a place of organizing and of home, of international solidarity being woven together for anti-imperial, anti-capitalist, and justice-based futures. You write later in the paragraph, these futures are cast by justice-based incantations for a different outer space, one invoked through the legacies of Third World internationalism alongside Roma futurism, hospitality of visitation, and the daily work of anti-capitalist spatial organizing. Located here on Earth, these spells cultivate acorns, not in a distant ethereal galaxy, but rather in a politics of emplacement. I really, really enjoy that. So finally, and sort of leading up to my question for you, I was struck by the resonance of the story that you tell beyond geographies that you directly engage. Silicon Valley imperialism certainly unfolds differently across the world, as you point out, but similarities are also striking. For me, then, the section on Schmeckeria resonated. I grew up in a place where it was similarly impossible to buy technology, software, or hardware as packaged by the West. Imagine even now, typical engineer in Iran would be earning $30 per day. So there's no way that we can buy this technology. And so my history as an electrical engineer was similarly like the children that you described. We would like buy things and pull things together. But it was interesting when I arrived in the United States, I immediately learned that I had to hide that history because of the side-eye glances and the discomfort that people had when I described what I did, and how I accessed all these technologies, how I learned to do any of this at all. So I wouldn't really share it when I come in there because it was treated as a kind of stealing, right? But then, reading your book, it was striking to me that this kind of activity is characterized as stealing, and at the same time, the Silicon Valley, again, sort of being sort of situated in design, is often celebrated as the hub of innovation. You cite for a term, but not directly like from counterculture to cyberculture. Like it has those origins, and it's always celebrated for innovation. But at the same time, we don't read about how it's actually pushing innovation and creativity. So I was, my question was, who's stealing from whom really, and whose creativity is cast as innovation worth praising and protecting and celebrating, and whose is cast as a stealing, cunning witchcraft. As a designer, then I would love for you to connect this to what you describe, unbecoming as the acts of world making, especially in your work, after the book and the anti-eviction mapping project and these activities of making and remaking that are local, that are joyful, that are about play. Again, I would love for you to talk to us about the kids in that movie who, hack, and so they just want to play a game. That's all they want to do, and kind of point us to those prospects of unbecoming and collectivity. Thank you.
Do you want to be? I think you should. Okay. We're just playing musical chairs. So I'm going to respond. Is that? No, thank you both so much for those really generous comments. It means so much to me, and it's weird to write something and then hear somebody else read them, and then, did I say that? What was I thinking about? No, thank you both. That was. I was expecting more critiques, and I'm like, what do I say? I have my own critiques, but I think maybe two comments that I could say based on your comments. I think first with Jenna, it's fascinating to think about some of the overlaps in your own research site and just how a lot of this is happening really differently in different places. But I think the way that anti-communism transits and the way that sort of the centrality of the West in thinking about technology, and this also gets at what you were just talking about with Iran. We forget about these different features outside of this space, and we forget about. I think, well, in the second chapter of my book, I'm trying to think about San Francisco through post-socialist analytics, which is something I'm continuing to do. I think it's sort of an ongoing project, but for those of you familiar with post-socialist studies, it was like a field that emerged after 1989, after 1991, when the Cold War ended and the Iron Curtain came down, and suddenly the West had access to the quote-unquote East, mostly Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, but also parts of East Asia. Vietnam plays a really big part in this, and also the way that anti-communism functioned in the U.S. relationships with Cuba. But so much of post-social studies gets really confined to Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. That becomes the sort of new hegemon in the studies of I split anti-communism and post-socialism. And so there's been this sort of push to think about post-socialism, not just as a geospatial kind of moment in time, like what happened after the Soviet Union, but how can we think about, just as post-colonialism has played a really important role in theorizing empire and theorizing the West or provincializing the West, how can post-socialism do more analytical work? And that's something that I'm trying to think about, given that there have been communist imaginaries that predate state socialism. Neda Tanasowski, who is your colleague and my former institution advisor, has done a lot of really interesting work trying to think about pluralizing post-socialisms and also thinking about what can you do analytically to think about the post being, what happens after the Soviet Union stops being the epicenter of our imaginaries of socialism, or what happens after the state becomes so central in our conceptions of socialism, given that socialist imaginaries predate and have existed in different places in different ways. And I think maybe it can also do some interesting work in thinking about provincializing anti-communism as it really renders these different places backwards, or like a place where people are stealing, or even in a place where suddenly GE's donations mean that the whole place needs to transform and bow down to the West. And so I think there's a lot more that it can do, and I feel like I'm still kind of on the tip of the iceberg in that work, but I don't know, that's just something I'm interested in continuing to think about. And in terms of, so Shvekirdia is a Romanian word with Romani roots that kind of means like street smartness or like kind of being deviant. And a lot of people friends of mine, people I spoke with during my time in Romania, identify as sort of deviant hacking or tech projects as Shvekirdia. And I've been really inspired by the work that word can do too, in terms of But I think that there are different words that kind of have a similar meaning to that in different parts of the world. You know, I don't know all of the different practices and their names, but I know that there are these sort of, I'm not sure what it's called.
We don't call it anything, but in India, it's called jugaad.
Yeah, jugaad, yeah, it's a jugaad in India. And I think that it probably means different things slightly depending on where, but it's still like interesting that these words have emerged times due to these relationships to kind of getting around different impositions of techno-capitalism. And so there's with the question of who's stealing from who, one of the things I talk about in the book is this video made by Norton Cybersecurity, which is based in Silicon Valley. And they released this video called The Most Dangerous Town on the Internet, and it's about this town of Bolshevik. And it just like, if you watch it, you see these people in like hoodies, like typing on their computers, and they're gonna like take down Western democracy by hacking. And it's, you know, it features this guy, Guccifer, who has the style of Gucci, but in the darkness of Lucifer. You know, it's like, oh, this is a film. But when you get to the end of the film, you can click the button to download Norton's cybersecurity package to protect your computer from the most dangerous on the internet. But I hung out in Bolshevik, and it's mostly like you said, it's like there were like internet cafes, they're less common now. But yeah, mostly it's just kids like playing games and trying to like develop different sort of social networks, sometimes also to kind of not hack back against the West, but just have connection with other people, and you know, and just kind of play. And some of them do have explicitly anti-capitalist critiques. Some of them are just kids having fun, but these are the most dangerous people on the internet. So but yes, yeah. And I'll say, like, you know, it's like when Microsoft became so dominant, there were these, you know, their operating system updates that you have to pay for, and if you don't, you can't use the latest software. And so it's just people who go to the flea market and, you know, buy these computers and put their own keyboards on those computers and, you know, download or pirate different software, music, or books because nobody can afford them in the West. And I think that holds true in so many places. So I think that question of yeah, like who's hacking who and who's stealing from who is really interesting. And lots of examples probably in this room that we could talk about in that regard. But I know we're supposed to do like Q&A, so I don't know if should I stop talking?
No, that's great. Let's open it up to Q&A, okay. And I'm going to move this mic to the table because apparently that might help. Okay, great. No, you're still
There's
going.
another
I'm
one,
just
maybe for the
now.
questions. There's another one. So maybe this could be for the audience.
That's okay. Sometimes we'll just repeat the question.
Okay, sounds good.
But given that we just have 10 minutes, so maybe would you mind taking questions? Sure. And then I'll give you a look when it's time to wrap up.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm just thinking about when you think about techno-imperialism, there's the concept of these companies taking over our individual lives and all of these products that we use, but then there's also this like land-based, nation, space-based aspect of it that you're getting at. And Seattle is, of course, a city that's also experiencing this. And when I think about like traditional empire, I also think about one of its purposes, purportedly, right, is to grow the tax base. But what we've experienced here in Seattle is actually, and it's the San Francisco experiences as well, right, is that this techno-imperialism, Silicon Valley imperialism actually fully disrupts what's happening on the ground in terms of where people are living, where they can afford to live, where they're moving. They're bringing in labor migrants, but they're pushing other people out, and they're not paying taxes, as many of us know, and then it's changing the tax base, yet it's also like Amazon that gives gifts to our schools that we no longer have taxes for. So I'm curious from the post-socialist perspective and from the Romanian perspective, like, does this play out in the same way there, where there is a company that is also kind of replicating or at least, I don't know, disrupting kind of what the state level imperialism is also doing at the same time, or interfering with that revenue creation and that.
Yeah, let's see if this will work. If not,
is this okay? Okay, we're good. Okay, no, that's I like that question. And I am not at all an expert on things happening in Seattle because I've just been here a year, but I do see like a lot of similarities with San Francisco. So that would be fun to talk about. But yeah, I'm trying to think. So I mean, well, I guess one thought is that a lot of the companies that go into Romania that are not local companies are going there because Romania is part of the EU. It has the benefits of being in the EU. Romania joined the EU in 2007 and then NATO in 2008. But it's one of the poorest countries in the EU, so there's a way to exploit local labor. It also has a really high English fluency rate because people were downloading and streaming MTV in the Cartoon Network in the 90s and subtitled. So and because of other things too, and now they teach English in schools, and there's also in certain parts of the country a high like German or French or Russian language base, so even companies that are working in those countries might want to exploit labor. But the state, there are a lot of these state-sanctioned entrepreneurial initiatives to encourage this. They want that sort of capital flowing. They also started this program during the pandemic, this digital nomad program. So if you're in the EU, you can hang out in Romania, and if you have EU citizenship, now that's in the EU, indefinitely for many people. But if you're a US tech worker, you can only be there 6 months or sometimes a year before your visa expires. So they have this digital nomad program to encourage people to bypass visa restrictions, become these digital nomads in Cluj. And the only requirement is, the main requirement is that you make at least 3 times the salary of the average Romanian, and that you have healthcare already provided for you by your home company. So it's like they're trying to bring in these people to incentivize economic growth. Nokia, a lot of people associate the siliconization of Cluj with Nokia coming in, which is a Finnish company that has a base in Silicon Valley, and they were doing hardware development, but they were only there a couple of years before they found better tax deals in China and left. And so there was this we're going to have all these jobs, and then everybody got pushed out, and meanwhile, a building got displaced, and 300 people were evicted to make way for this Nokia that never was. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of gets it. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, wonderful talk. I really enjoyed listening to everything in your work. I had a kind of question to follow up on a comment about ecology. I think you mentioned at the very beginning that ecology is part of the way that you think about your work. And an association I made during the talks about the relationship between ecology and post-socialism. Sometimes I think about post-socialism as being this movement towards the political subjectivity of ecology. I think about Latour's work, about the movement away from universal into terrestrial. Just a couple of associations I made in thinking about how you think about ecology in the context of your work and potentially this group as well. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great associations, and thank you for bringing that up. I meant to say something about ecology earlier, and I forgot, so you prompted me. No, but I do. Yes, and just for context, there are ways to think about ecology, I think, philosophically, and even just evictions themselves can be considered, an ecological issue if you think about the 300 people that I mentioned. Actually, when they got evicted, they ended up being pushed into quote unquote social housing that was actually in the local garbage dump. And they're still living there and fighting to return to the city and having to deal with all sorts of environmental racist and toxic realities right now. But the third chapter in my book is so in 2013 there was this huge project to basically mine. Canada wanted to mine Romania's gold. There's this mountain called Roșia Montana, or Red Mountain, that has a bunch of gold. Romania also has 2/3 of Europe's virgin forests. So there are a lot of resources there that the West wants. And there was this huge protest movement, Salvat Roșia Montana, or Save Roșia Montana in 2013-14. This was kind of they were inspired by a lot of the alter anti-globalization organizing to kind of fight back against Canadian gold mining and all of the environmental devastation that it would induce. And they were ultimately successful. The World Bank got involved. It was very messy, but they never ended up doing this mining project.
And what I question in that chapter is why has there been no mass resistance to IKEA, which is now the largest owner of forests in Romania? And it's kind of this weird story. Harvard University bought all of these private forests to basically invest their endowment money in. But then they did it illegally, they were going to get sued, and so they quickly sold all these forests to IKEA. And there's been no mass movement against that, even though the forests are getting plundered. And part of my argument is IKEA is also invested in all this urban infrastructure. Going to IKEA in Bucharest is considered the sort of middle class aspirational thing, buying like the smart furniture, fast furniture. It holds a certain place in this liberal imaginary. Now it's also buying all the tech offices in downtown Bucharest. So a lot of the tech offices are actually owned by IKEA. There are like book launches to read IKEA's new catalog, and it's like this like kind of cool hip thing to do. So anyway, I'm looking at how liberalism functions in sort of prohibiting a mass movement against the plundering of the forest. So that's kind of the main place where I think ecology takes place. And then also this thing about acorns in chapter 6, which is a little bit more speculative. But there are these acorns that apparently went up into outer space and were inculcated with a sort of communist utopianism and now are planted on Earth, and that's supposed to be where communism grows. And I look at that and also trouble that a little bit. But so
something I think you mentioned is to make drawing connections to genetics.
Yes.
So I think it would be great.
These are the 2 points that I'd hoped to make. So thank you both for calling my attention to them. So IKEA is one of the bad players in the book. IBM is another. And so, I mean, probably some of you know this history of IBM and the Holocaust. It made these counting machines that were used in Nazi Germany to basically orchestrate trains that were transporting people to concentration camps, Jewish people, Roman people, traitors, anarchists, communists. IBM also played a significant role in Romania doing the same thing and worked with the state in 1941 to help engineer its 1941 census, which was a fascist census. This is when the Legionnaires and the Iron Guard were coming into power in Romania. And so Thomas Watson, who was the CEO of IBM, the founder, actually visited Romania, worked with the government to engineer this sort of demographic project in order to kind of execute this eugenic project. After the communists came to power, IBM left Romania and wasn't there until 1989, when it came back immediately after communism ended and helped absorb the National Computer Factory, which was called Felix. And so now there's IBM outsourcing in Romania. And there's a part in the book where I look at this moment when there's a supercomputer that won a Jeopardy game in San Francisco in 2011 called Watson AI. So even though Watson has these sort of nefarious fascist roots, the company still kind of upholds him as this guy who they're naming their supercomputer after, who won at Jeopardy. And the funny thing about the Jeopardy game was the computer won by wagering more money about a question having to do with the author of Dracula, who was Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula in this very good kind of Gothic Orientalist way, never having visited Romania, but kind of through this kind of fantastical lens. But the irony is that Watson actually was indeed in Romania and helped to engineer that project. So that's another way in which I'm looking at these sort of entanglements of liberalism and fascism in a particular post-socialist, pre-socialist moment. So,
yeah. Thank you so much for all of that, and thank you to our discussants as well. We have one more to give away, so if you are a grad student who feels like this, oh, that
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was great. So, when you say IBM or you're talking about, are these like individuals that we're thinking about? Like you said, IBM came back right away. Is this like a nefarious, like, is this a company? like, how does the company make that decision? Like, who do we associate?